All right, so welcome to the Thursday, October 12th Food Process Ontology Workgroup meeting. The document I'll pop into chat. So I welcome it if anybody else has agenda items. I just have two. I haven't put any more thought into this meeting. Perhaps there's some follow-up things from past weeks. I guess I could mention that I've sent an email off to Sebastian and Bjorn, who were part of the OB material processing group, hatching a bit of a proposal for the top level. And so I'll follow up with them about any progress they're making to report out. As well, I wanted to mention that Foodon is getting this food production stream set of hierarchy of terms, and I will just show that by screen sharing. I figure it's important because it involves different kinds of industrial processes at just a super general level. So this is sort of an invitation to review that content as well and to see if it's suitable. So let's see, where is it? Okay, food production stream. So this is going to be a robot table for food on inclusion. And the reason we're putting it in is we have a GRDI project, which is about monitoring antimicrobial resistance in the food production chain of things. So there is a hierarchy here of food production streams that Rhiannon has put together. And that includes cattle production in general, beef cattle, dairy cattle, poultry production, broiler chicken, layer chicken, egg production, milk production, meat production, veal underneath that. And that's it so far, swine. So just super general names for these.
Hey, Damien, you know,
Yep.
we've mapped this out all the way to the business classification systems, the acronym, the NAICS codes,
Okay.
and the SIC codes for all the food production systems. That's inside of IC Foods, so you don't have to do this by hand. These are actually already done and mapped over at in an ontology over at IC Foods.
Okay. So that's good to hear. We don't want to be duplicating. How is the IDs? How are the identifiers seen and all of that going in terms of definition?
It's a proto ontology, you know, but it's there to be used. Let me see if I can find it for you. But yeah, you wouldn't want to. I mean, it's all aligned with NAICS and SIC. So let me see if I can find it.
Great. And Troy, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Damien. I'm sorry if I missed it. Is food production stream here? Does it mean a series of actions? So all the things we do to get from raw material to process thing, or does it mean a sort of ecosystem, like you know, all the actors and actions that make something happen? Matthew's comment about NAICS codes and SIC codes would indicate company types or types of work, which maybe is the same or slightly different from types of food processing activities. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, I wonder if you could go back just a half step and say what we mean in this case by a production stream.
Great. Yeah, I wish Rhiannon was here, because she's the one putting it together, and she didn't actually put a definition in for food production stream across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is that what we might mean here is, in essence, a sub-industry, right? A group of actors and things that happen. In which case, this is a little bit more of an actor designation or a cluster of actors, which kind of makes me wonder why it would be in food on. We could also mean a series of actions that happen to get to an end. And if that's true, then we could think of this as a sort of superclass of the food processing steps that we've had, right? All the things that can happen so that beef emerges or what have you. And then we could, in that case, this would be like an alternate parent class of a bunch of different food processing activities. So rather than material combination, there'd be cattle production. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that, but it causes me to think about these terms slightly differently.
Yeah, right. I think we need to distinguish between, like, yeah, the word stream to me is a little challenging. I think we want to have, unless you're going to, define it as a series of processes. But we need to distinguish between, because I think you were just using them a little bit interchangeably there, Troy, between food production processes and food processing processes. And I think what you're talking about here, Damien, is food production processes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're right. These are all, knowing that it's coming from the GRDI project, the desire is to capture the physicality of the processes and their locations, sampling.
What is GRDI?
I forget what the acronym is, but it's a Canadian government-driven research project into collecting biosamples within the food industry for antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah, so we've, to Troy's point, we've been doing this in a way to characterize food systems actors for building out smart food goods. Mm-hmm. And that's the approach that we took. But clearly, there's going to be a mashup between what the actors do, the equipment they do it with, and and the process that they engage in.
Okay, this is definitely, I know Rhiannon is driven by the processes they engage in, not the names of the actors, and there would be like a little bit of a metadata level about organization and location, but this.
Well, I'm not thinking about the names of the actors. I'm thinking about the types of actors that engage in specific activities.
Okay.
A slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Okay. So types of facility. We're definitely interested in types of facility.
That's what I'm saying.
As I look at the definitions that she's written for these individual streams, it definitely looks to me a lot more like we're talking about actions here. We're talking about collection of processes or actions that happen with a defined starting and ending point, right? The starting point is a certain kind of animal, and the ending point is a certain kind of meat commodity, basically. And what I think is interesting about this for our broader discussions as a working group here is this is an alternate way to categorize food processes, right? It's with a certain value stream or type of product in mind, right? All the actions which result in X, as opposed to all the actions which are physically similar to each other, regardless of what they're being used on. And totally useful, totally valid as a way to categorize things, and an additional way to categorize food processes. And I think it's also a way of categorizing processes such that their inputs are similar or their outputs are similar, something like that.
Yep.
So there's like a dependency, like steps which belong in the cattle production stream are steps which have as an input something derived from cow, something like that. You know, I'm just trying to think about like how, like I'm trying to place these terms, not just sort of looking at these as standalone terms, but trying to put them in an overall body of thought that's organized. All of which sounds totally valid and useful to me. I think it forces us to sort of build out our mental models here in food processing.
Right. Yeah.
Can I share my screen for a second?
Yeah, sure.
I think this should look familiar to you. That these aren't new. They've been sitting sort of lying in wait for a while now. So we've had this IC Foods food ontology, food processing ontology for a while, where we've broken these things down. I thought pretty well, but it seems like we want to start again. But this is pretty well broken down. This is all up in GitHub. I just looked in GitHub. I did not see this food production. There we go. Why I'm zoomed in so tight, but I've got a little bit of lag on my screen here. Just a second. But you can see we've got a variety of where we've aligned these various food production industries, and we can drill down a little bit deeper. The idea up here, let me go back a step, with the food processing was that, at some point we will be able to link certain food processing methods or substitute them or link them with sensory experiences. So that if you want something crunchy, you're going to do a deep fry or whatever. You want to make it crispy, you got to do another. Okay, so we've had that now for a while. We've got this food production one. And then the food processing industry as well, and the various types of actors in the food processing industry. So, for instance, we've got animal slaughtering up here that we could drill into. And so we can get down to some pretty nice levels of detail. And then we've also got what we've called the allied industries, or the machines that actually do these processes for these specific types of actors. So we have the classes of actors and the kinds of equipment that they use in order to engage in these processes. I would think that if you're worried about collecting biosamples from specific things, you'd be really interested in the types of machinery that's being used and where certain samples hide on belts or in pots or things like that. But these this is an old slide deck. I can dig these up if you think these are useful.
Yeah,
I'm not convinced that they should live in food on these ontologies. I think they should probably live, adjacent to food on, because they're not really specifically related to the food itself. But I'm open to the problem.
Yeah, it's I can see with these class hierarchies. So first of all, let's be clear. What you're showing us is a set of labels in a hierarchy. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not a full-blown ontology. They're a proto-ontology, but they're built from standardized vocabularies that we would want to map to. We don't want to make this stuff up on the fly.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's a start.
Yeah, it's a start, and there are no definitions for the terms, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
To be quite honest, I don't know. There could be for some. I think a lot of those codes come with definitions, those code bases. So probably we abstracted those.
Okay. So I don't mean to put you on the defensive at all. Like I think these are useful resources, but it's making a project out of those and taking it in a certain direction. So I appreciate that, and I think we should define the space of these efforts.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm just saying that it's better to start with a list that's already being used, a list of terms, rather than making some up off the fly and coming up with our own definitions.
Yeah, I mean, let's maybe just think about the thing that you were just showing us, Matthew, as an accelerator, right? We're not starting from scratch. There's a whole bunch of stuff here that can quickly make
exactly.
And this sort of actors zone of the ontology work here is certainly important. Like, we're going to want to be able to talk about the who, not just the what of what's happening. Be that as part of a process stream, or frankly as part of the chopping and cutting discussion we had earlier, right? There's the devices, there's the organizations, there's all these things are part of the story. And that is certainly part of it. In addition, I think, Damien, maybe Rhiannon is looking for, or we as a group ought to have a quick opinion about where these things called process streams fit in Foodon, and where they fit with the sort of nascent work of food processing that isn't yet in Foodon, but we're talking about it here. Yeah, my sense is, sorry to repeat something I already put in the chat, but my sense is that this alternate way of grouping activities by so-called stream is a new way of looking at things, and therefore it deserves to live, and it's a useful way of looking at things, so it deserves to live as a sort of family of processes at a pretty high level in the food process actions hierarchy. And I would propose something like process by stream, and then you can list what the different streams are underneath that. And that's different from material combination, material separation, and so forth. That might be processed by, well, we talk about process by objective, right? Process by outcome or whatever. Process by stream, like that would be consistent with our logic in this group over the last couple of months. Now, we might argue a little bit whether stream is the right word, whether there's other things besides stream, but it's sort of heading in that direction. I think that would be the most appropriate high level resolution to what Rhiannon is trying to do.
Okay, great. I put a note to that in, and I will definitely send her this video. And I have dropped the spreadsheet that this stuff is into the food process group. So yes, we should look at.
By the way, we might also find in the future that we want processes by actor. We want processes by device, right? There's lots of different ways we could cluster all the different things that one can do with food. And if we were to have process by actor, then the next level under that would be things like Matthew just showed us, right? Ice cream processes and syrup making processes and what have you, right? That could be a way to go.
Right. Processes.
Well, in some ways, those are the same thing as by objective, right? I want to make ice cream.
Yeah.
Maybe like I don't know. We can debate it, but the point is that these things are overlapping or alternative or interesting ways of categorizing processes. They are not cattle process. The cattle process stream is not a process in the same vein we've been talking about before. It is a collection of actions, right, to an end. Right, so it's a category or a super category or subcategory, something like that. And then within that, there is slaughtering, for example, and raising, and whatever. Right, it says so in the definition there. So I think that view is consistent with our working group so far.
They're inviting models, chains, butchery itself as a set of steps. So all of this is inviting more training together of processes at a subordinate level.
Yep.
How many masters and post PhDs could we entice to start working on these different things? Yeah. Okay.
It's inevitable when we talk about processing that the step that you look at can be infinitely large or small in its scope. Right. We can always take something and break it down into sub things, and we can always take that thing and house it within a broader chain. We know we're going to need the model to be able to handle that. And so, it's a question of altitude or granularity for various tasks.
Right.
Totally fine.
Okay, so what I've been remiss about is sort of setting up little tasks that spin off from our Zoom conference meetings here. So it sounds like one task that I could have Rhiannon do is just scan through Matthew, through your food process hierarchy there, to match up to the classes that she's defined, if it's an exact match, and if not, to figure out what the relationship might be to those things.
I think I see it differently. Like I see a list of actors and a list of actions as orthogonal to each other. Like, of course, there are actors which are more common in certain actions, right? Slaughtering is most often done by a slaughtering company, but I don't see the mapping being especially useful at this stage, personally.
Okay, let me just clarify. So I think what I saw from Matthew's content was types of actor in the food business, but also we saw ice cream production and some things that aren't.
No, careful. No, ice cream production was listed as an industry.
Oh,
It's a code given to companies who do that thing. So it is a shorthand for organizations, not for actions.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you could use it as a seed list to get ideas around what the actions would be. But no, it's not that. That list stems from NAICS and SIC codes, which is an industry classification, not an industrial process classification.
Okay. Could you guys drop into the docs here what those codes, those two code types were?
Yeah,
that'd be handy for actors. Okay, great. Okay. All right. Well, I guess from a top level, then what I expect is the industry actors codes cover a lot of other product types besides the ones Rhiannon's mentioned, such as ice cream production, which is a bit of a dairy product spin-off. So I would just expect maybe there's some correlation at the highest level. And I'm realizing now that Rhiannon's list might be motivated mainly by production chains or streams that involve microbials. Like at some point you boil the milk, no more micro.
yeah, I mean,
all of the
it may
products
be
spinning off
Yeah.
of just aren't of her concern in her list, but there are others that we should or would have as a general category.
I mean, if you're trying to find a pathogen, like ultimately you want to go to places to find it, and places are organizations, and organizations have NAICS codes and so forth. And that may be part of the goal. And so it would be, for some groups, useful to know the kinds of companies you look up in the yellow pages if you think that the source of contamination is the filtering process. All right, well, what are the company types that have filtering? Great, those are the addresses I'm going to go visit. Yeah, I mean, that's how this could play out.
Yeah, or developing new filter technology. Can you do this? So sourcing.
Or who would I call to be subject matter experts to make things more safe? Or where would I look for past violations or whatever? Yeah.
Okay. Great. Other comments from people on this? So Matthew, did you mention you kind of need to get are those ontologies on the GitHub right now, or if not, could you get a link to them going?
The food processing one is. I'm looking for the industry, the abstractions in alignment we did with the NAICS and SIC codes right now.
Okay.
Not sure where they are. They might be on a different machine. I'm just looking at one machine right now. I'm in my Google folders, trying to figure out where I left them. I don't see them on GitHub at the moment. So
if it's okay.
But I'll put them up there and point you to them.
Okay, great. Can you do that and then get the links in here for that? That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of is a good segue into one other thing I was going to mention, which is this food on biosample draw IO diagram. So this biosample thing is coming from different directions, and it's talking more generally about biosamples, but of course food is part of that. So what I was going to try to lay out on Food On website as a pattern to help people out here is a general pattern of material processing, taking in materials which have characteristics and outputting materials that have characteristics. Really basic, but it means the language can often echo for any process. Like ice cream making, you can have a material that is ice cream as an output, and then you have characteristics that pertain to that ice cream. So we need the vocabulary for each of these things. Boiling water, output boiled water, characteristic hot water. So Food On needs to sort of be more systematic in covering the characteristics pertinent to the materials and the processes. But there are actually some tricky curveballs here, especially in Pato right now, for example, that there are some, quote, things being treated as characteristics, which actually rely on information in the past, collected in the past. So anytime you see age, that you can think that's a characteristic, but it really is the measure of a duration between events. So it's not something you can immediately observe. So there's that distinction that's sort of showing up a bit as we wander around these ontologies like Pato, looking for characteristics. And then questions about whether age, then they devolve. As soon as you have something that has some information in it, well, is it information? So here's just a little diagram showing that OBI has this age determination assay. They've sized it up that age is information in an age measurement datum, and it's calculated based on a date of the birth date and so on. So it would be so great in the future to get a normalized view of all of these things so that we know when we're encountering an ontology how they're dealing with characteristics. So I was going to write up a bit on the Food On site about that. I don't know how much it touches on. It touches actually on things like raw characteristic. So where is it? Food thawed.
Do you mean if I could just chime in for a question here?
Yeah, sure.
So that's something that USDA we're kind of constantly wrapping our minds around is, raw versus dry or something like that. Like if we're talking about characteristics like raw, if we say that it's dried lentils and going off of kind of what you have currently in the Food On definition or proto definition in the sheet of, a material that has processing that hasn't affected its biochemical composition. Right. Is that like going to be the characteristic raw or dried in those cases where it's like, like a dried bean or something like that?
Yeah.
And I think there's nuance here when we're talking about these kind of things, and it would be really helpful for USDA if we can kind of sort things like that out.
Yeah, totally. I've run into that in the past, seen clearly that USDA talks about dried lentils as, quote, raw. So we actually have to be explicit with a raw, dried kind of subclass, I think, here, and we're not quite explicit at the moment.
Right, because it could have maybe affected the characteristics if it's been dried, or maybe not, but it's also raw and dried. I don't know, just as an example. Sorry, I don't need to fixate on this. It's just something we're talking about.
Yeah. That's right down the alley here. So it seems like a contradiction to some of us, but others, the food classifier people have had rules around that. So that has to be reflected here, and tried to get at that with these matrices of exactly how drying is happening, and what was the initial state of that. Anyway, so don't mean to go down a rabbit hole in terms of the processing, but just this actually has to be explored in detail for each kind of characteristic that we're talking about. And this diagram here for biosample is meant to cover our little models for each kind of quality that a biosample can have. And then I would be putting that up on the Food On website. It's somewhat applicable to other things, but really food. Yeah, Troy.
Damien, are you proposing a sort of general model for food processing here, or are you really just talking about biosamples? Because this trifecta, this triumvirate, feels potentially good, but different from the sort of overall model we've been talking about over the last several months on food processing. We talked about steps, we talked about inputs and outputs, we talked about actors, devices, and I'm having a hard time locating this triumvirate in that general discussion.
The triumvirate is around the language of processes and their inputs, their outputs, and characteristics of those. So biosamples are often these materials that are the output of a process, and they have certain characteristics. But in the food biz, as we can see with moisture, we've got all of these subtleties around the hydration and dehydration of materials and the nouns that we talk about, and then the qualities. So we need to be more systematic about that. So I'm calling this part and parcel of material processing, but more specifically food processing. So that's why I introduced it today, to say, yes, over here on the biosample area, we're dealing with the characteristics of processed foods. And what are they? How can we be more systematic about them?
Are you proposing that the label for a processed food should be dependent on its inputs, outputs, and characteristics? Is that what we're talking about here? I mean, these green boxes here are not processes, right?
No, they are the output, the physical outputs of.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I just don't see the link between the triumvirate and this page. Are you?
It's not showing up in every single process material, but it is showing up on some of them. And that's the thing. We don't always have names for the qualities of the outputs, specific names that sort of cover it. But sometimes we do. So rehydration, rehydrated solid, at least one quality from Pato, increased water composition, is applicable to that little triangle of activity. I mean, vocabulary around this process.
Yeah, I mean, in general, this working group is focusing on defining and organizing what on this page are blue boxes.
Yeah, but they're all so. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, every process, sometimes processes are really tightly, we already have the language to describe the output of that process as a material entity. So there's a very tight connection, and there's a very tight connection between the quality words that we're applying. So all of that's handy, and it will be showing up in, let's see.
I'm just not sure. I'm not sure I agree. Like, I'm not sure that the name of the outputs is the driver of the name of the actions.
Nope, I'm not saying it is either. I'm saying they're triumvirate. They're related, and often very related, or occasionally not related. But if we take a look at the axioms that are slowly starting to show up in the has output at a general level, food boiled is the material output of this boiling and then draining process, I guess. And
Yeah, I actually, I think I might stop way short of that and say, at this point, I don't think we have hardly any axioms about the relationship between a process and its outputs. We've been talking about processes as a fairly independent thing, assuming that you can apply that action to all kinds of things. You can choose to chop anything, including steel pipes, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
And so I'm not sure that the properties of the output or its characteristics actually have much to tell us in this working group about the nature of processes which we need to define. I think they exist pretty independently, at least at this state in the conversation. Of course, when you pop popcorn, popping is oftentimes done to popcorn, but it doesn't have to be at all. And we as a process working group don't care what you pop, just that popping is a thing you can do.
yeah, so that's just about taking the language up to some abstract level. So here's deep frying process leads to food deep fried in the case of food. But if we're talking about,
I'm not sure what to make of that axiom. That seems like a little bit of almost a nonsense axiom. Like every time I steam something, the result is a steamed thing. Like,
yeah, I'm just talking about the language here that people are often using in databases. So they may never have the language of processes. They may never connect a food to a cooking and steam. They will only have a noun or a class in their database called steamed food. And then they will organize all of their foods underneath that are steamed on the recipe menu or whatever. So it's often useful in the real world databases to have these nouns, but if Foodon can provide the service of linking them up to the process that led to them unequivocally, then we are providing, say, the nutritionists a service, because now the nutritionists can talk about nutrient conversion rules that apply to cooking anything in steam.
Okay. I think I follow you. Let me see if I can build on it. There are in the real world lots of what we might think of as outputs that have an implied process in their identity. It's even in their label oftentimes. Yeah, dehydrated lentils as an example. And we can use these outputs with their implied processes as a starter list for processes which need to exist in Foodon. Like if dehydrated lentils is a thing, then dehydrating needs to be a thing so that we can make that relationship later. And so these process inclusive output labels, dehydrated lentils, give us clues or give us a trigger to start or to focus our processing work. Totally agreed. I guess I come back to the same point I've made a couple times in this group, which is happy to take any starter list as a trigger to then make sure we derive or create or coalesce the food processing terms that will address that. So if we wanted to start with pulses as an example, and all the different ways that pulses can appear, they're dehydrated, they're fresh, they're canned, they're cooked, they're stewed, they're in sauce, whatever. All of those imply different processes. Let's actually see if we can make the process which is implied by that thing. And then we can say, check, done. Yeah. I'd love it.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of waiting for someone to give us that starter list. So then we can check, then we can go through it and create those things and have that initial exercise fill out some of the inevitably very long catalog of processing terms that we're going to want.
Okay. So this is the crossover to what we're doing in the Foodon curation group, talking about a couple of times in the last few months, which is we have these characteristics of foods, such as raw, fresh, chilled, food safe chilled, fresh chilled, and a few others. And now we're going over to see what the definitions of these are in these other vocabularies, such as the FDA's and FoodX2 definitions. And what we see is they don't define the qualities, they define material entities that have such qualities. And so we can't actually use their definitions directly on the quality of the thing, but there is this pairing between the material that has the quality and the quality. And then others actually just talk about processes. I believe preserving by freezing sufficiently. So this is food X2. So that's now a reference to the process, not the noun or the quality. And that's why it's good to surface this consciousness about when you're talking about characteristic, material entity, or process, and the fact that each of them has different hierarchies, but hopefully consistent. So for us, we are on the food on curation side, talking about tasking people to look at each of these terms, find out what their definitions are in the other systems, which might be referring to nouns or the processes, and then make sure that they are backed up on the process sheet. Now, this could be called a mini project because here we're just looking at certain FDA definitions of these deep. It's one facet of FDA definition about these terms here, mostly straight from anything that has an FDA definition is straight from one little list from their technical language. So we're trying to make sure Food On has the qualities that back these up and the processes. And I'd be happy to have others step in and help on the process side, which is mostly what Food X2 approaches these things as.
Let me see if I'm following you. In column R here, we have a variety of what I think we would in this group call processes, actions, that come from various sources, Food X2, maybe FDA, et cetera. And maybe they're in separate columns, but at the moment we're looking at Food X2 ones.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Damien, but I think what you're asking for is for someone to find or create process terms to go into Food On, which relate to these things or are these things, but are housed within a structure for processing that matches what we've been discussing. So it's like find the modern Food On term or new one if necessary that will cover this idea. And do that for the Food X list, do it for the FDA list, etc. That's going to generate, some terms, or it's going to move requiring moving some existing terms. And then we can claim a small victory. Like now Food On is Food X2 compliant when it comes to food processes, so to speak.
Yeah. And we're actually helping out the transatlantic journey where, say, USDA just has these classes of noun, frozen and dried thing, and Food X2 only has processes, and they're not quite, of course, they don't line up, and semantically they're not the same thing. So there has to be a connection between the two to sort of map stuff over.
Yes, and the connection is we want there to be a documented link from this existing term in this existing database to what we would consider the cleaner version, official version, so to speak, in Food On.
Right. And our project over on the Food On curation side is just to finish this list off first before moving on to any other terms in terms of characteristics or processes. That's our little mini task.
Okay, so as an example, you're on the cell irradiation right now. Mm-hmm. Someone in this group should propose where the process called irradiate belongs in material, process by material, process by output, something like that.
Right. So we just happen to have food irradiation process here. It's more specific. It's food irradiation, not irradiation of anything. So that's a question: should we enable a more general irradiation class?
I think we've already decided that, which is we're dealing with food-on processing terms here, and so these are all implied to be processes which apply to food. They don't have to be applied only to food, but
Well, I meant as a parent, like we've got this very abstract.
But the parents are also within food-on, and their food processes.
These parents are not. This hierarchy at the very top is the one we've been talking about that can quite possibly exist outside of food-on, and
Yeah, it should, right? Like a whole material processing, you know, parent vocabulary that we've been talking about spinning out of OBI, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it OBI? Yeah.
Yeah.
Having it off of OBI, having a material processing ontology, and those should all be parent classes of any processing that's inside of food-on, or whatever food processing ontology gets developed.
Yeah.
So maybe, but for time being, like we have a parent for these things. It's called like food irradiation. I'm sorry, it already exists in food-on, or it's proposed to exist.
Yeah, complements of Languel.
Okay, and does it have is it a subclass that is it in a hierarchy that eventually taxonomy that eventually goes up to the energy modulation thing we've been talking about?
I'm looking right now where it starts. There's a lot. There we go. So right now, this physical chemical modification process is under food modification process. So the title does not quite line up with the specificity of its place in the hierarchy or its definition.
Okay, and food modification process, I think this group would say, is an outdated term. We do not want to hang more stuff under that. But we're smarter than that now. We have by objective, by process, or by material, something like that. And it needs to go under one of those, or we have to make a new one, right?
That is a question I have. One thing, how to approach layering on that. Yeah, we've got a generic mechanical or physical chemical process, but we're doing it within the context of food safety, and therefore there's some other check boxes that have to happen in this as we're doing it.
I'm sorry, but I'm still a little skeptical of this by objective piece, because now we're going to get to by flavor objective, by safety objective, by right, and we're adding an infinite number of layers here that would actually be and tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me like we're adding additional layers of complexity that could already be embedded if we design this the right way, embedded in the graph itself without needing to specify the actual objective sort of hierarchy class.
Yeah, I hope to be able to lay the whole objective versus mechanism to rest first by saying that the objective hierarchy is probably going to be really shallow. If we do implement objective process by objective, it'll mention health objective or sterilization objective or whatever, but it's really the mechanisms that are all talking about things.
What if I want something that's sweet? That's a flavor objective. It's sweet. It's low calorie. It's like, am I going to list all of my objectives, or so what's the point of doing it if it's just shallow and I can't do anything with it?
So plug and play. Plug and play is the objective of objective, that I can want a sweet thing. That's my objective. And now the system can infer which processes will get me to that sweet objective. But if we don't have to pre-populate the sweet objective with a whole bunch of stuff, we don't have to be pre-defining anything there. Hopefully if we're going to use reasoning at all in this, or swirl, or whatever technology. As soon as we state an objective, it won't have predefined classes under it, but all the mechanisms that might lead to that objective, a material with certain characteristics, will offer themselves up as possibilities, and they will become perhaps subclasses by reasoning, by inference, but not by us actually filling in that info. So what I'm saying is, yes, we may dabble with this notion of objective and define certain kinds of objectives, like a sweetness objective. Your corporate executive says we need crunchier chips. They've just stated an objective. We'll have a class that says, maybe we'll have a class that says crunchy chips objective, but, or crunchy food
Yeah,
objective. And
that's kind of where I'm going. Is,
we won't populate
we...
that. We don't have to populate anything below it. Maybe, but how do you express, I want an objective? The other way to express it is to say a material entity with a characteristic. I want as the objective of my process, this chip and the quality crunchy. So it won't be necessarily that we have to populate a whole objective hierarchy. So I think we can set that whole thing aside, and just focus on what these processes are and what they output and what their characteristics are. But the plug and play thing is to talk about objectives and to have suddenly reasoning deliver a bunch of processes that will meet the objectives we've just expressed in whichever fashion. So just on this particular note, I was thinking, well, maybe the whole thing about food processing that's different from material processing is that when we're processing food, there are these other objectives. One of them's health. Maybe they're organoleptic ones. We mention the word food at some tier, and that means we're getting into that. But yeah, we can see how far we can get without mentioning the word food. And I would expect that the higher level terms don't mention the word food. We hit the word food somewhere down in the hierarchy, or maybe we can avoid it completely. I don't know.
Sorry, my internet just bounced and I missed like the last bit of what you were saying. Have we moved on to something?
Oh, I was just thinking, we can play perhaps with process by objective. It's meant only for plug and play to be able to recognize processes automatically that meet certain objectives, but we can express those objectives in different ways, maybe not explicitly by creating classes for them, but just by talking about material outputs that have certain characteristics, expressing an objective that way, chips and crunchy characteristic. But I suspect we don't really have to develop that hierarchy in any depth. It's all about just talking about these processes and their mechanisms and the qualities of the things that they output, and hopefully getting a whole plug and play around objective from that approach.
I see. Yeah, I get that. I just don't know where.
Whoop, just dropped. We're not hearing you at the moment. Yeah, still not hearing you, Matthew. One might say most of the time objectives are expressed about the materials, the output materials and their characteristics. And so the plug and play operation is to match to any processes that create those as outputs. Can also be about inputs. You need certain inputs to your process. And that's an objective, to find processes that are compatible with the inputs and get you to the outputs. So we might approach this whole objective thing a little bit more indirectly. Not have to set up check the explicit objective of crunchy chips. But anyway, still back to this process tab. So perhaps we can weed out the word food here, say, and generalize it and not have to deal with its food specifics. We certainly definitely want a general class called fermentation, under which food fermentation could be positioned. That's all the action up here at the top. So a bulk molecular mechanism underneath that might be fermentation. There becomes a negotiation with the gene ontology to see how much their definition of fermentation matches what we need as the biological process.
Okay, so wait a minute. I would say it's more of a microbial mechanism than a molecular mechanism for fermentation.
Sure, I'm my ignorance. We'll get the right people working on this, like you. And in fact, if we talk about food fermentation, we may mean that from a controlled perspective. So we would never actually put it underneath biological fermentation. It would actually have as its component, a controlled component, biological fermentation under it.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, if you're making wine from the yeast that's on the leaf, that's on the grape skin, there's a certain amount of that maybe that's already started on the vine that is not controlled.
Yeah. So how to
So
model
there's a transition point.
Yeah. How
When
to
you
model
yeah.
when all those inputs are coming in and what condition or state they're in.
It looks like we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, we are, and fermentation itself is a whole separate. I was hoping a separate sort of group to sort of pick that one apart and model it. Okay, so to have a feeling of progress here, I do invite particular people who want to look at the process, the presence of processes for this set of 25 terms and how they're handled. This is pitch this a bit to our food ontology group to focus on this moving forward. Each of these food X2 things is either a process or a material, and we do need that in our process tab. So to start critiquing the hierarchy and how those processes could go in, so we know, so we can start making this triumvirate. So I offer that out to you guys as tasks, if any of you are particularly interested in that, as a prototype teeth sharpening exercise.
This is relevant for the work I'm trying to do with USDA checklist. So I don't know if it'll be like exactly the formal ones that you need, but I want to kind of have a set of these terms that work for our own purposes that hopefully is connectable to something that Food On would have. Like I was just talking about this with Kyle, my boss at USDA, and he was saying that, you know, FDA and USDA have different definitions for raw. And so some of the stuff that's in our old SR legacy is not actually raw, but like we say, it is using the definition that we have. So having this fleshed out would be really helpful. So I'll try to help with this, but it would also be great if more people can help as well.
Mm-hmm. And another aim is to make sure each of these terms for the characteristic ID and the process, I think we've even got a related process column now, are diagrammed. So there's this diagram column, Jay, and so I can give people access rights to edit this. And this diagram is what I was showing right here for food on biosample. The trying to be more systematic with the characteristics. And you'll see a number of these are works in progress diagrams. So,
And links to all these diagrams are in the doc.
yeah, this food on biosample draw.io is in the header of this right here. The link is there, and then this I'll pop it in.
Yeah, that's already in the document,
Okay,
in the notes doc, right there at the top.
that's there, right? And then the actual robot table is right there.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, and the draw.io is there too. Okay, cool. Thanks. Got to jump.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So I'll just add a note here inviting to work on this.